Hello, good to see you. Pastor Sam with a reflection on archaeology. I've got a little bit different of setup. I'm going to see how it goes. First of all, the walls are green. See, we actually did something. Um, my wife has been quite busy, so we have new walls. Anyway, that's not what this reflection is about. It is about archaeology, and especially I was discussing this earlier today with my wife, and she gave me some, as usual, valuable feedback. So my point, and I'll be very explicit, don't let archaeology shake your faith. That's it. That's my point. That's my point. We're going to be talking a little bit more about why that ought to be the case, why you should not let the latest archaeological whatever shake your faith in the negative sense, and why you might want to find encouragement in some things that archaeologists do find. And that's what I want to start talking about is proof. Because that's really kind of what it comes down to. What is it that people are finding by digging through the soil? They are attempting to prove certain things, and it's this specific word that I take issue with. Why? Because I am, after all, a scientist. I am an engineer. I did go to school for engineering. I worked as an engineer, and I would consider myself to be a scientist. Not only that, but a mathematician as well, the two most noble professions in which proof is important. In science and in mathematics, you start with a hypothesis, a thing that you think is true, and you conduct an experiment designed in such a way that you can determine whether your hypothesis is true or not. And if your experiment bears it out, your hypothesis is, for all intents and purposes, proven. I'm not going to air quotes. I'm going to wiggle hands a little bit. Proven. Because one of the important things about scientific proof and the scientific method, Google scientific method, if you want to hear more about that, is repeatability. So in my totally hypothetical example, I have conducted an experiment to prove X. I will lay out exactly what I did in my experiment, all of the different parameters, the results that I got, and you, independent scientist, can recreate my experiment on your own using your own equipment in your part of the world, and you should be able to achieve very much the same results. And if that's the case, it strengthens the correlation between hypothesis and proof. Hand wiggling, not air quotes. Proof. If it doesn't, if your experiment does not achieve the same results, then there's a problem somewhere. And I'm not going to get too far into it, but it's this repeatability that is at the heart of the scientific method. In a mathematical sense, when we prove a thing, especially as you took geometry, maybe you repress those thoughts from your memory, you would start at a certain point and you would complete a series of statements which have already been proven true to arrive at a conclusion which you have then proved. And it is very much repeatable. Another person can follow those same chains of steps in order to arrive at your conclusion. However, the problem with archaeology is that it is not repeatable. And it doesn't really follow the scientific method at all. It's kind of backwards of the scientific method. In the scientific method, we start with an idea and we create an experiment, and our experiment hopefully confirms the idea. But in archaeology, they start with the conclusion, the thing that they have found, and they have to work backwards. What are the events which most likely took place to give us this object? And they kind of work backwards to a starting point. Now, the problem with this is that it's very much theoretical. It takes place almost exclusively in our heads. And it's exactly backwards of the scientific method. So it's not provable in the sense that a scientist, a physicist, a chemist, an engineer, a biologist, a mathematician would be able to prove their work. Instead, they're starting with their conclusion, and they're saying, what do I think and that's the key word, what do I think is the most reasonable chain of events that have caused this conclusion? And we have stepped outside of the realm of scientific proof into the realm of conjecture. Now, they very well may be right? The only person who knows that is God himself. Unfortunately, we do not know whether the person is right or not. They are thinking what sort of events have taken place in order to cause this conclusion. But they may very well be right, and they may very well be wrong. They are not able to prove in that same sense that they are right. They are rather showing by example that this thing is so. Oh, the camera is going to hate this. I'm going to give you an example that shows you that proof by example is horrible. And yes, I'm doing this especially for the rich irony that it performs. I have a deck of cards. I'm going to take out... Ooh, you can actually see that. I'm going to take out the jokers. Because are jokers in a deck of cards? That'll become important later. I'm not going to shuffle it. It's already been shuffled. See, there's the 5 of spades right there. What I want to do, we're going to draw 3 cards. I told you I shuffled it. It looks less and less like that is true. 3 cards. Wow! Based upon my evidence, this is entirely random. Based upon my evidence, a deck of cards only contains hearts. There is no other suit in a deck of cards. I have just proven, again, not in the scientific sense, but in the archaeological sense, I have proven that a deck of cards only contains hearts. This is amazing. It's amazing. This is going to upend the card-playing world. The game of hearts is obviously going to be thrilled. But I would have to think many card games are no longer possible. A deck of cards only contains hearts. Interesting. Let's dig a little bit more. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. Perfect. This did exactly what I wanted. All right. Well, I'm going to see if I can get these all held and show you. Well, my earlier hypothesis is in fact incorrect. A deck of hearts, a deck of cards, does contain 4 different suits, but we have 6 red cards and 4 black cards. So we have to assume that a deck of cards contains 60%, 6 out of 10, 60%, contains 60% red cards and 40% black cards. It was previously supposed that a deck of cards contained an even amount of both red and black cards, but we have just proven that a deck of cards actually is imbalanced. And if you're interested in red as trump, you have an advantage over someone who thinks that black suit should be trump. I hope this example was exceedingly ridiculous. Oh, by the way, how many cards are in a deck? Do you count jokers or not? Oh, the sun is... Hold on, I gotta pause this. All right, there we go. I look not quite so washed out as I normally do. How many cards are in a deck? Seems like a reasonable question. In this deck, there are 54, because there are 2 jokers. However, when I play cards, I hope that we're playing with a deck of 52. So even this basic question has gotten us a little bit off track. But still, what have I actually proven? I haven't actually proven anything, right? You know, there are 4 suits in a deck of cards. Each one of them has 13. That's what's actually true. But as I have... I'm sure I'm not inventing this word. I'm going to use it. As I have archaeologicalized the cards, I have arrived at some false conclusions because I didn't have complete information, and I necessarily don't have complete information because we're not able to scour the entire earth, and certain things have been misplaced or utterly destroyed or whatever, that we can't know the entire situation. And the only one who does that, as I said earlier, is God. So we are operating in the realm of archaeology with incomplete information. We are not proving in the scientific sense. We are making conjectures based upon what we think is the most likely scenario. Oh, and by the way, the people who do this have a vested interest in continuing to be paid to do this. Not saying anything about their personal ethics, but disclosing this potential conflict of interest, that they do have a financial incentive to keep being archaeologists, special guests notwithstanding. So there's a limit. There's a limit to archaeology, and we have to understand that it stands outside of proof in the scientific and mathematical sense. Archaeology will never be able to prove that such a civilization said this or did this or whatever. It's unable to do that because it's just using examples. They'll find a thing and they'll say, oh, we have this thing. And now we think that this much greater thing is possible. Remember my example from the deck of cards. I was making conjectures using incomplete information that I then assumed were true, when in fact they were not. Someone who is operating with complete information, you and I, who actually know what's in a deck of cards, are able to say, no, hold on, there are not actually 60% red cards and 40% black cards. There's actually an even distribution, 50-50. Second special guest, trying to remain...
50!
Thanks, Paulie. See, he's got my back. He blew out your eardrums, but he did make my point, so I appreciate that. Now, I will say, before it sounds like I'm just poo-pooing entirely the field of archaeology, they are able to draw what I think are reasonable conclusions, sometimes. But that's kind of the point, one of the problems with it. Who determines whether a conclusion is reasonable or not? Well, archaeologist 1 versus archaeologist 2. And who's to say, how do we determine, again, objectively, scientifically, within the realm of proof, how do we determine who's right? We don't. It's the classic case of he said, she said. We're not able to prove in the scientific sense that anything is true. Now, I will say, if they should dig up an artifact, they are able to hold up that artifact and say, this thing exists. That they are able to prove because they are holding it in their hands. They are able to demonstrably show, not repeatably, but demonstrably show, this thing exists, which seems a very trivial statement. What they're unable to do is form conjectures. No, they do that. What they're unable to do is make further proofs from that. Because I hold this item in my hand, I assume that this must be the case. Again, that's the word assume, which most of them don't use, but are in fact relying upon. Because I have this certain thing here, I assume that another thing must be the case. Because I hold this pot, which is the same type of pot that the Greeks in 800 BC used, therefore I must assume that Greeks from that time period were here, right? Sounds kind of, and it sounds very reasonable, and it probably is not that far from the truth. However, it is conjecture. It is conjecture, pure and simple. It is open to being false. No more than anyone else's conjecture is. For the sake of full disclosure, that's what I'm doing right now, is making conjecture. Although I happen to think it's logical. So is it a mathematical proof or not? You be the judge. Or is that the entire problem? That's what I'm saying. Who is the one who tells us whether we're right or not? All of this to say, don't let archaeology shake your faith. It sounds very convincing when news station X or website Y posts this shocking thing. Archaeologists have discovered enough shrouds of Turin to cover 100 Jesuses, right? Or enough pieces of the cross to rebuild Noah's Ark out of them. Which of those shrouds of Turin are just some cloth? because there were a lot of people wearing clothes in the days of Jesus. Most of them, in fact. There was a demon-possessed man who was naked, or mostly naked. But I have to assume, again, I have to assume that most of the people wore clothes. And Jesus, as a common person, probably had similar clothing to most of them. So how much Shroud of Turin actually touched our Lord versus how much was just some other dude's underwear? And we are worshiping it. Hopefully not worshiping it. We are, well, I don't know what we're doing to it. I ain't doing nothing to it. Some people may be taking encouragement in that. And that's kind of where I want to head with this. I cannot get my words straight. Don't let archaeology shake your faith in the negative sense. If it does verify something, that's cool. That's cool. That's great. If that verification is debunked as not actually true, just shrug your shoulders and go, oh well. Right? So let it be an encouragement to your faith, but when it appears to say, oh, we have found artifact Z that disproves this thing about Jesus, just go, no, you haven't. You don't know anything about scientific proof. You are obviously no scientist. I laugh in your face across the internet. He is good at making my points. I think I'm going to keep him. So there's my point. Archaeology, I have mostly negative things to say about. But that's okay. Some people find encouragement in it, and if you do, that is perfectly fair and reasonable. Find encouragement for your faith, right? If there are things that they find that you're like, oh man, this is so cool, this helps to add a sense of reality to my faith, I think that's awesome. But don't let... I think I'm going to get all four... Oh, no. Evie was on earlier when I wasn't recording. I got to pop up this special guest. She's just a little bit short on one end. Don't let it shake your faith. Again, is my point. Know the limit on archaeology. It is a field of conjecture and is not scientific in the sense of proof and proving and repeatability and the scientific method. It stands outside of those things. So put its claims outside of the realm of, again, scientific proof, not science. That's potentially an argument for a different day, but certainly outside the realm of scientific proof. It does not follow the scientific method. In fact, it cannot follow the scientific method. It relies upon proof by example, which is necessarily not proof and prone to being wrong. And those things are not scientific in the least. That's it. I think I've repeated myself like 3 or 4 times now, so I better wrap it up. Thanks for watching, and take this as encouragement in your faith.
Take it.
He's amazing. Love him.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah,
See you later.
See you later.